I was recently thinking about design patterns or also communication patterns like target action, closures, and delegates, although I'm not a fan of delegates and I would rather like to people not use them too much anymore. Obviously, you have to implement them with a lot of UIKit elements, but not for your own structure. And one thing that I like to motivate to use more is combined data stream. So I have here all these communication patterns. Every time you use a UI element, it's very annoying because you have to think of which of these you have to use. Was it target action? Was it somewhere in notification center, like for a text field? But with combine, if you create a publisher for all of these interactions, you don't need to think about it anymore because you know that, okay, what is the publisher for this and this that I can get my data from. Combine is advertised from Apple as a way of processing values over time, but it's equally important or useful when you want to pass data around because it's a stream, it's a data line. And in contrast to these other communication patterns, combined data streams have a lot of advantages. So for example, you can have multiple receivers of your data, not like for delegates where you only have one person who can be the delegate who can receive this data. With data streams, you can have as many subscribers to the same publisher as you want to. It is type safe, it is very linear, and on the same time when you pass data around, you can process it. You don't have to, you can just use it as a data stream, the same way you would use a closure. And especially these communication patterns, as a little motivation for myself, I was thinking of SwiftUI. So this is a project, you can get it from my GitHub if you want to code along with me. So I have one property, my string, that I can put here on my text field. And I use this property on multiple times, so it's in my text field. But I also show it down here as a text. And I also can change this property by pressing on this clear button, which sets the text to an empty string again. And here in this whole view, there is no target action, there's no communication patterns. Nothing like we're used to do with UIKit. So how does it do it? The secret is in this at state. And you can also see it $text because this is a combined data stream. It's a two-way binding, which means that the data is flowing from our property to this text field, and the text field can also change it and send it back to the text. So all of this data is kept in sync, and we have only one source of truth. What we don't have to take care of is creating these communication patterns or implementing, thinking of where to get our data, how to pass it around. And this kind of bindings are so nice that I was like, that would be nice to have as a publisher, or to have this two-way binding. The combined community did start another project to create publishers from UI elements. So in UIKit you could, I have here another example in my text view controller and a zip file. So this is recreated the same example. I have a text field, a label, and a clear button. I always get a little bit confused with label and text now because of the different namings in UIKit and SwiftUI, but I have it under control. So I have here a label. I want to have the same data streams, the easy binding in my UIKit code. So the question is now, how do I do, instead of target action or delegates or whatever, I use publishers. I did add here some convenience functions. So, and the one that we are going to use is in the UI text publisher, but we're not going to, we're going to use some of them. And I will show you first how nicely this is implemented in this example. And then I'm going to explain you the code that drives this publisher streams. So in this view controller, I do need to have a source of truth or the property that holds this text, the string. And instead of a property, I'm using here a current value subject. If you don't know what it is, I do have another tutorial which I will link in the description. It's a special publisher that you can send values to because you can continuously, again, publish more and more. This is very useful when I have here my text interaction. I want to continuously, when the user is typing, send more values. This is in contrast to other publishers where you sometimes only publish one thing, like a URL session data task publisher. There's just publishing once. The subjects are good for user interactions or continuously driving your data stream. So now this is my source of truth, which I want to create some data streams here in my UI. So similar to the SwiftUI example, I want to have this property, the value from this property, going to my text field and my label. I can do this by saying my text subject. Then I need to use your sync to receive my value. And I can set this new text string to my label's text. So every time my text subject publishes a new value, my label is updated. And I have to use here self. In order not to create a reference cycle, I can use unowned self. And this subscription I need to keep alive. That's why I already added here a subscription, a set of any cancellables. So it's very easy to use store in subscriptions. So these are automatically delocated when this view controller leaves. So this is nice. Now I have one data stream from my subject, from my publisher to my label. Then I want to have a data stream from my subject to my text field. So it's pretty much the same. This is the subject that I create a subscription with sync. And here I can say my text field's text should be this value every time this updates. And I again have to store this in my subscriptions array. So now I have the two consumers from my publisher, and I can start doing the other way around from our UI elements to our data. And the first one is my text field here. So I can say my text field, I added some convenience stuff to this UIKit. So this is the text publisher. And if you use here sync, you get every time I'm typing in this text field or the user types in the text field, I would here create a newest value. And I want to add this or send this to my subject or publish this. So my text subject, you can use with subjects as send functions and send this value. So this is a, again, unknown self. And then store this in my subscriptions. Then the last one that wants to change my text field is here this clear button. And actually I could easily now create an outlet, but maybe I don't want to do this. I can also add here to my button a publisher. Or this is another publisher I added in this extensions, which is a tab publisher. So this one always publishes every time the user taps inside. So this is for the UIControl touch up inside. And here I can get here the value, which is it's not sending anything because it's just the tab. I can change my subject and send here an empty string. And then store this in my subscriptions. The good thing is now I don't need to think when I press here this button. Usually you would need to reassign or make sure that the value from your property is reflected in the UI. But since I have here my automatic data streams, my UI is always updated correctly every time this property changes. So in this case, it's very similar to a didSet property observer. Usually you only can use a didSet when the property is owned by this text view controller. But this is no problem. I can actually move this text subject in another view model. So for example, in a view model, this view model can be shared with a lot of other instances. I can move my text subject in there. Then I can create here a view model. This is a view model. And this was probably not so clever because now I have to add this here everywhere. So here my first subscription is now added for my view models text subject, my view models text subject, here to my view models text subject. So you see, I can easily subscribe to my subject here in this view controller. If you share the same view model with multiple view controllers, no problem, you can just add as many subscriptions as you want. And the good thing is, because I store this data, the lifetime of these subscriptions is linked to keeping a reference to the subscriptions. So the moment I leave this text view controller, or the text view controller leaves the heap, there's no more data streams to this text view controllers. So it's very efficient, resourceful. Okay, now I have my 4 data streams going to and from my subject for my publisher. And now if you run this, I added in the scene delegate a programmatic tab view controller, which you probably would want to put in a coordinator, but I wasn't sure if you guys, I guess not everybody does know about coordinators. I was not willing to do that at this point. So when I load, I already see here the correct value for my text subject. After my computer crashing and a small cider break, I'm now back. Now we can have a look at our 4 data streams. So the first one from our current value subject, I had here 2 data streams to these 2 UI elements, to my text field and my label, and both of them already reflect the right value that I initially set here with hello. Then if I change my text field to hello world, this text field, because of this text field publisher, sends the value to the subject, and all of the subscribers from the subject receive the newest value, which means that also my label gets the new value. You can even see this more if I here press on my clear button. This sends a different value to our current value subject, which is an empty string. So the moment I press here clear, my subject has a new value to publish, and my 2 consumers, my 2 subscribers here receive them, and I put it on my label and my text field. So I have this data streams nicely going on. If you now remember from the SwiftUI example, I didn't have to write so much code for SwiftUI. I had one property that I just needed to say put it here and keep it updated, keep my UI always updated, especially for the text field, because this is these values here for my view model to my text field and back from my text field to my view model. This part I would like to make shorter. So if I have a look at the content view again, here in this example I only had one line saying create me a binding with this property. So this is this $sign to a state property, and what it's doing is it's actually creating data streams like we did here manually with combine. So we're already half there, but I just don't want to write so much stuff, because especially here this back end from my text field seems to be something I would probably always want to have. I always want to have a text field that reflects a property. So I'm going to comment this out, because I don't want to separately write these 2 bindings here every time, these 2 data streams. I want to create a 2-way binding back and for my text field in one step. So I added a convenience function to UITextField, and this is create binding. And I decided what kind of publisher I would probably need to bind this to, and you already saw here that I needed to have a subject because I had to publish continuously again. So it just made sense to stick with the same current value subject string type. So in this case I can give it here my view models text subject. The other thing is what you saw in this 6 lines is I had here I created these 2 subscriptions that I need to store, otherwise this data stream is not going to be alive very long. And in this convenience function I also need to store my subscription somewhere, and since I already have a set of any cancellables in my view controller, I might as well store my subscriptions in my view controller. So I can here have as the second parameter in this function store in subscriptions, again my own subscriptions. So this one line now replaces this 2, or creates a 2-way binding, which I had to here do with the 6 lines. And this is super convenient. I think it's also much nicer to read than before, because here I'm like, what's going where? This is the one thing that sometimes gets a little confusing, to know where the data is going. But especially if I know I'm going to have 2-way binding, 2-way data streams, having one function that does this automatically for me is nice. And the other thing that you see is, because the only code that I have in my view controller is now declaring where my data is going, where it's back and forth going. So my view controller just needs to declare all the UI elements, similar to SwiftUI. So I don't need to create here target action implementation, which makes the view controller a lot more light and easier to understand. Since this kind of two-way binding is, if you have SwiftUI, we have these bindings for UI control views like sliders, steppers, text fields. I have another example for a slider view controller. So this is the second tab. I have here again one outlet. And in this case, I was smart enough to create here a, not a weak outlet, but a strong one. So if you create an outlet, you should pay attention to have here a strong reference, not a weak one, which I wasn't used to anymore because I don't do UIKit so much. And if you do this, it gets actually easier because then you can use here, actually it's more true for this label, you can simply, instead of sync, use here assign to on. And this also reads a lot nicer because you can directly say I'm assigning this property always to the, on the label on this property. So my label always reflects the right value. Additional to just putting the number there, I also did a little bit of transformation here with a small map operator. So if I change here this value, you always see in the label already this number. This kind of transformation you would probably also do in a view model. I mean, this is a very simple example. So you would maybe create this whole stream in a view model and then take the resulting string from there and assign it to the label. In this example, I did the same here. This is the same style as for the text field. I created a two-way binding from and to my slider with another subject. In this case, it's a subject of, because it's a slider, it needs to be some kind of number. So it can be a CG float or double. You can also, instead of just a this two-way binding, create publishers from a scroll view. So in the last section, I added here an example of creating a publisher from the content offset of the scroll view, so you can always get notified when the offset changes. You can also create publishers to get notified when the keyboard is shown or hides. So this is it's probably not the nicest example, but it does seem to work enough. So I have here two text fields. And if I show the text field, my scroll view, I did change here the layout, one layout constraint, and my scroll view is scrolling. And always also backwards when I hide my keyboard. One of the advantages is that instead of thinking, do I need to use for the keyword a notification center, for my button I need to use target action, instead of thinking of all these different communication patterns and remember which one was the one to use in which situation, instead you can unify all of these patterns into combined data streams. So it's always nice to not think so much and just have one solution that works for everything. So now that I have shown you, hopefully, that this might be interesting and useful, or should I say, one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is to know if this is, because I thought this would be a really nice use case for combined data streams. I also wanted to know if my enthusiasm is just me or if somebody else has it too. So just leave me a comment if you think this is great, because I think it's pretty great. So now I want to, since I already hopefully convinced you how great this is, what I actually did to get to this publisher streams. So in the UIKit publisher helper file here, the first one is creating a publisher for all these UI control events. I'm not going to show you a lot of this code. The main thing is here creating a subscription, and you have to deal with the back pressure management. If you're interested in what this demand in there means, you can have a look at the WWDC presentation from 2019 about introducing Combine, where they discuss how this pattern between publisher and subscriber works. So you see here also the subscriber requests a demand, and if the demand is high enough, then, or greater than 0, only then the publisher publishes something. So Combine works with back pressure, which means the subscriber, the end user, decides how many values it wants to receive. This is in contrast to RxSwift, which does not work with back pressure. But for there's some use cases where this is quite handy, which I probably have to talk in a different video about, because this is quite another advanced topic. So usually you don't need to write. There's not a lot of cases where you need to write a publisher, but in this case it's super useful. I only have this one publisher, which I reference for all of the others. So you see here the main function is creating a publisher for a UIControl event. So for example, this is not the right one, in the UI button, I can use this because this is conforming to UIControlView. This inherits from UIControl. It also inherits now my publisher function. And I can here decide what kind of control event I want. And for button, it's a touch up event, touch up inside event. And this publisher publishes the element you're adding this to. So you can get the UI button here, but this is probably not really useful in this case. So I basically transform this from publishing the element itself to just returning here a void. So that's why I said here it's returning a void, just notifying that something happens. So similar for the UISlider, you can get a publisher for a slider value with this value publisher function. And again, I'm using here the UIControl publisher that I added. In this case, it's for the event value changed. You can also change this to editing ended if you prefer to have different values. You can also merge different publisher events together if you want to have a more sophisticated data stream or information. In this case, you see here that what I actually get in my data stream is the UISlider itself, because this is from UIControl. Then I'm typecasting this as a UISlider and getting my value here. So in the end, I can publish the floats from the slider every time the value changes. So this is this one-way communication from UIControl views, from UI views, to your data streams, or to kick off data streams. In order to get it backwards from our data or publishers, I showed you this assign to or sync. And now the question is, how do I create both of these data streams together? So in my text view controller, these 6 liners, creating these 2 data streams separately, I have now this convenience functions create binding, so we can have a look at the text field. So in this case, I'm using here the notification center, which means that my publishers in the background use different kind of events or communications to the UIControl views, but as an end user in my view controller, I don't have to think about it anymore. I just know that just get me the publisher for it. So in this example, I have here the notification center. You can get the publisher, or you can get a publisher that publishes events whenever the text, the change notifications is sent. And here in this case, I added to myself. Otherwise, if you put here any, you get all the notifications for all of the text fields in your application. It might be an interesting feature. Then again, I need to typecast and get the text from this object. So I create a publisher that publishes strings from my text field. So now maybe I'd put them next to each other. So I have here my view controller again, where I wrote this binding for my view model, specifically the subject to my text field and for my text field back to my subject. And instead of every time you have a text field creating these 2 data streams again and again, I have a function, again an extension to my text field, create binding, that creates me these 2 data streams every time I call it. And I have to give here the publisher or the subject that I want to bind this to. So this is a current value subject, and I give here my set of any cancellables, so this subscriptions, with as an in-out parameter, because I need to change this inside of my function in order to store my subscriptions. So this is pretty much the same 2 data streams. The first one is from my subject to myself, so my text field's text, and then again from my text field with this text publisher that I have here up here to my subject. So this is just 2 ways. I also, in case I don't want to do too much work, have here a little check if I actually need to update it or if it's already the same. So if my value is already the same as on my text field's text, then I don't send it, or then I don't update my text. If my subject already has the same value as my text field here tries to publish, then I'm not going to send it to my subject. Similar to the text field, I did also create for the sliders the same binding here. So again, I have a subject that I create data streams to my sliders property, and for my slider, which has this publisher stream here, to my subject. In this case, it's a little bit more complicated because the type of a UISlider's value is a float, but you might not want to use a float for your subject to work with your other UI. So I did use here binary floating point. So what does conform to binary floating point is, for example, float double and float 80. So you can use all of these. So just a little bit of generics in there that makes it a little bit more advanced, which makes it a little bit more reusable, which means that I have to here do a little bit of switching between these two types. For my subject, changing to a float, and then for my UISlider itself, going back to the type that my subject has. So I think this kind of publishers from and to your UI element personally I think it's quite a nice little tool to use this kind of publisher data streams. There is already a open source project which is from the Combine community, and the one that deals with these UI elements is for RxCombine, but they only implement publishers from the UI elements. So they would also get you here this text publisher, but they didn't implement this two-way bindings, so this create bindings, which I think makes it a lot more useful and just more declarative, nicer to read. If you found this helpful, you can have a look at all the coding examples in the GitHub repository. If you liked it and you think I should keep on working on this, you can leave a comment and a like. I'm now going to enjoy the rest of my cider. See you next time. Happy coding.